Guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'll be showing you a game where I was able to beat Grandmaster Andrey Gorovets with the white pieces in a Carol Con. So without further ado, let's get started. So apparently this is known as the Two Knights attack in the Carol Con. I did not know the opening name when I played it, but basically it's just kind of like a line that you can play if you want to avoid theory. It's quite harmless, and it's pretty easy for black to equalize, especially if you look at some games that you can search up on like ChessBase or something. But basically, like, it's just a line to play if you want to have kind of like an equal position. So that's kind of why I went for it against this Grandmaster. And after a couple moves, we have this position, which was actually quite a key moment in this game, because here I made the wrong decision. So I kind of wanted to spice things up, right? So I wanted to keep the queens on, but actually it turns out that here trading queens is actually not that bad. For instance, after queen takes, bishop takes c3. Knight d7 and d4, the position is about equal, and some might actually prefer white here. So that probably would have been best, but instead I played queen g3, like that, and basically saying to my opponent, you can take c2 if you'd like. And that's exactly what he does. And the second he plays that, I start thinking to myself, wait a second, I don't actually have like compensation here. So because it's blitz, I need to move quickly. I can't just think about this for like a minute. So I played bishop e2 with the idea of castling and then trying to figure things out. So he plays queen g6. He's trying to trade the queens, right? But I'm not really interested in that, especially since I'm down a pawn. So I play queen c7, which doesn't actually do too much, especially after his response knight d7. But it's a very annoying move, and it's important that when you're down material and you're trying to gain some compensation, that you make things hard on your opponent. And here, he plays knight d7, which is probably the best move, and I castle. He plays queen d6, he's still trying to trade queens, of course. I run away, and g6. And here's another moment where I feel like I could have played better. I played d4, which is like a very natural move. And then the game continued bishop g7 and bishop e3. But I feel like instead of d4, maybe here I could have played b3, with the idea that I'm still trying to make things complicated. And after bishop g7, the natural response, I played bishop a3. Now here, many of you might be thinking, after queen d5, white is basically forced to trade. As you can see from the eval bar, I'm not sure that this is so clear. Because for instance, if we just trade here, and white maybe goes rook c1, which seems rather natural. And let's say black plays perhaps bishop f6, just so that he can castle, and then maybe he wants to bring this bishop out, right? Well, now after something like maybe rook c7, castles, maybe I double up on the c-file, and white actually here, he actually does have some compensation, because black can't move the knight, because then e7 falls. Black needs to get his bishop out, otherwise his rooks are just stuck there. He can't move the e-pawn forward to get rid of that problem, because his rook is there, and his pawn's pinned, so the position's actually not so clear. Maybe bishop b5 is coming next. So I'm actually going to change this here. I'm not so sure that this is better for black. So continuing with the game, after d4, bishop g7, bishop e3, protecting the pawn, castles, rook a d1, knight f6, knight e5, all simple natural moves. My opponent here plays knight d5, which is obviously trying to capture my bishop. But here, I make a very counterintuitive move for most, which is bishop c4. I actually am not dealing with the threat of knight takes e3, because frankly, I'm not so sure that it is a threat. Many times people stress the importance of having the bishop pair, but here in this position, after bishop c4, let's just say black does take on e3 and plays bishop e6. You'll see that black is probably still better, right? Because after all, he is still up a pawn. But I'm not so sure that this is so clear, because if black wants to get rid of my strong knight, then he's going to have to give up his bishop as well. And after something like maybe, let's say bishop e2 maybe, and maybe rook f8, I can start messing around, and black here doesn't really have the option of capturing my knight, because if he does that, then we enter a situation of opposite colored bishops, where black's advantage is very marginal. So I don't actually think knight takes e3 is a problem. Obviously it's not bad, because black is still up a pawn at the end of that variation, but bishop e6 was definitely a good move by my opponent, just developing his pieces. You can see that his bishop is on a good square. Even though it's blocking his e-pawn, he doesn't actually want to move it, especially since my knight is blockading the e5 square. Next, I played bishop d2. Here I distinctly remember that I was actually running out of ideas here, so I kind of wanted to kind of mix things up. And I was hoping he would play bishop takes e5, which unfortunately he didn't. And at first, you might not really see a problem with this move, because, after all, now black is up 2 pawns. I mean, how good could like a bishop pair be, right? But here after bishop c3, I'm not so sure that black is still better, especially in a blitz game. Because, for instance, if black just moves the queen somewhere, not only does white have a very, very strong dark squared bishop here, but he also has the option of entering an opposite colored bishop position, where pawns and material advantages aren't necessarily very important. It's rather who can attack better with their respective bishop. So here, like I said before, I don't think black is better. Obviously, the computer will say that black is better, but in a practical game, it's much, much harder for black to play this. So that's why I was hoping he would take on e5, but he didn't. He moved his queen back to d8, obviously with the intention of trading queens, and I played queen a3 because I don't want to trade queens. Knight c7, he wants to trade pieces, and here I actually do take, just because if I move my bishop away, he's actually planning to play bishop d5 and knight e6, which is very, very annoying for me. So actually here, I'm kind of obliged to take, because it's kind of like the lesser evil. And then after knight takes, I play bishop c3 rather than, for instance, bishop e3, just because here I can actually somewhat contest for, I can somewhat fight for this a1 h8 diagonal that was dominating before. The game continued queen c7, queen b3, and here is a very, very important moment in this position. So I'd like for all of you to just pause the video, take a minute or two, and think about what you would play in this position. And be careful not to look at the notation. I will cover that up right now. But basically, just think about what you would play. And keep in mind that when you are up material, when you are better, you want to make the conversion as easy as possible. And this is a recurring theme in this game. And my opponent, if he knew that advice, might have played a bit differently. So hopefully by now you've paused the video. We're going to return to our analysis here. And here in the game, black played bishop takes e5, which in my opinion is like the last move I would think of playing here. Just because after d takes e5, now you can start to notice some dark square weaknesses. And I'm the only one with the dark squared bishop. So although black is still better, black is still up a pawn, and black has a pretty good knight that's blockading my e-pawn, this suddenly just got more difficult for black to convert. you'll see that in the game, I start to create some more counterplay, and eventually my opponent cracks under the pressure. So instead of bishop takes e5, I would suggest a lot of moves. For instance, knight f4 here seems fine, with the idea of going to d5 and blockading my isolated queen pawn. Another good move might simply be, I was thinking maybe rook a d8. I'm not sure if there's any knight takes f7 tactics. I'm pretty sure there aren't. But yeah, just play rook a d8, protect the d5 square, attack d4, and all's good. After bishop takes e5, you'll see I start to develop some counterplay, starting with f4. And rook takes d1 was a mistake. Queen b6 probably would have been better, just trying to trade the queens, but still it's not so clear because of the piece imbalance here, so that would have still been better for him, but not too bad for me either. But he played rook takes d1. Now the queens are still on the board. He checks me and plays knight d4. So basically, his idea was, you want to play f5, so I'm going to bring my knight over and blockade it. But if you think about it, that's kind of a bit too much. I think, especially if he had just played queen b6 here and traded the queens, his king would have been safe and he wouldn't have to like worry about all this. But I just feel like knight d4 and then knight f5 is really just, it's not simple chess. It's really messing things up, and it's making things way harder for black. And now I'm not quite sure what black could have played instead. I'm sure if you took some time to run it with an engine, you could definitely do that. But I'm not interested in doing that. I don't like to analyze with engines. So but just as a general guideline, I just feel like this is overcomplicating the conversion. And you can see that I'm really just going all out here. And you'll see that the computer evaluation says -16. But in a practical game, this just went from much better to black to unclear. So after this, he played knight h4, queen c4, and I'm planning like f5, e6 to try to break through. And it's important to note that my opponent collapsed with the move knight h4, because as you can see, here he had 50 seconds. After knight h4, he had 14 seconds. So that's another important thing you gotta watch out, especially when you are relatively low on time, is you really need to watch out for your time. And you never really want to spend more than 50% of your time on a move. That's definitely a very easy generalization to make. And here he just spent 36 seconds on this move, which is definitely not great. I went from being down on time to being up on time. And after queen c4, knight f3, f5, my opponent had 5 seconds and he finally cracked g5, e6, and he lost on time. So what can we learn from this game? Well, we can learn a couple of things. First of all, the most important thing to learn is that when you are winning, when you are better, you want to try to make things simple. And my opponent did that for most of the game. He was trying to trade queens, he was trying to trade off bishops, he was trying to trade pieces in general, just because with less pieces on the board, the conversion tends to be easier. However, later on in the game, he started to get more active with his pieces, and he started to take more risk. And with that, he started to make the conversion harder and harder for himself, which was just unnecessary. So that's one thing we can learn from this game. Another thing we can note is that time management is very important. If you take a look at some of my moves, I'm trying to spend as little time as possible. For instance, after queen takes d1, I have 35 seconds, and after the next move, you'll see that I have only used 2 seconds. But when my opponent used a whopping 36 seconds on knight h4, which is frankly, a pretty automatic move, right? I mean, where else can your knight go? I mean, that kind of just set him up for failure. And after queen c4, which definitely isn't the best move because the computer is suggesting mate in 6. But in a practical game, things are all of a sudden not so clear. With f5 and e6 coming, breaking through on this diagonal, I just try to make life hard for my opponent. And the combination of my counterplay and my opponent making the conversion harder on himself, those were basically the ultimate factors which led to me swindling my opponent in this game and beating a 2700 GM Blitz. So thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed my analysis and hopefully learned a couple things from this game. While it may not have been the best play from my part, I do think there were some very instructive things that I did, that including causing trouble for my opponent when I am definitely much worse. So again, thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to my channel, leave a like on this video, and turn on notifications. And I'll catch you guys next time. Bye!